Anger that isn't resolved within relationships and within family begins to follow a pattern. So in the top left, you'll see the incident or the acting out or the explosion of anger. So there's an anger episode. Somebody lashes out at the other person. And then what follows that is there's a remorse afterwards. I'm so sorry. I wish I could take back the words. I can't. I won't do that again. And so there's all of that regret and guilt that follows that. And that leads to a honeymoon. Everybody's on their best behavior. Nobody wants to hurt the other person because you're trying to compensate for what you just did. So you're super nice, super attentive. You come home with gifts. You give them extra time. You ask them if they want to go for a walk and just do things with them, trying to make up for that. Everybody is on their best behavior. Now, here's where the problem begins to happen. You see, nobody resolved the last conflict. Nobody sorted out why was that anger there? What should have been done to change that? What needs to be resolved? You know what you did? You just stuffed it down and put on a honeymoon. Best foot forward. And so that's still down there. But now there's other things that start happening that are stresses and annoying. But you're on a honeymoon. You don't want to point those things out because that might lead to a conflict. And you're on your best behavior and you're on a honeymoon. You don't want a conflict. So what do you do with the latest annoyance that happens? You stuff it down. And the pressure starts to build because nothing's been resolved. You're afraid to deal with it because you're not sure how to resolve it, or you don't want to mess up the honeymoon. So you press down, push down, suppress it, and the pressure builds. And the pressure builds until there's an explosion. And so what happens in a family where anger is never resolved is that cycle happens over and over again. Now, the key thing that I want you to understand is that as that cycle repeats year after year, it gets shorter. There's less time between anger explosions. Secondly, the honeymoon gets shorter and shorter until there's no honeymoon at all, until everybody's angry all the time, but nobody is resolving their anger. It is just getting to be a constant sniping, hurting each other, lashing out, closing your heart, withholding love. It is anger, anger, anger. So what I say to people is this. If you go to an anger management course and they don't understand that complex trauma, and complex trauma means that anger never gets resolved in a family, they'll say, count to 10. And I go, really? When you got all that anger pushed down and this cycle of unresolved anger is just making more and more stuff and shorter honeymoons, do you think counting to 10 is going to cut it? No, it won't. Because until you learn to resolve anger in a healthy way, you keep feeding the lava of the volcano. And after a while, you can't stop the eruption of the volcano from happening. Now, let me show you that in a little different diagram. If you see the downward line, that's kind of the general mood within the family, okay? So it starts up, everybody kind of likes each other, getting along, but it starts to slide. So pressure's building, you're getting more annoyed, more irritable with each other. What is the tool that kids learn about how do I get back to the honeymoon? Well, they learn sabotage this downward progression and create a crisis where everybody's super angry, and that's going to get us back to the honeymoon. How's that for a tool? But that's what they do. Now, the problem with that is that over time, the crisis has to get worse and worse and worse to create the effects, but the honeymoon gets less and less and less. But for many people, when they're in the anger cycle, what they begin to do when they feel the pressure building, they go, I know there's going to be explosion soon. Let's get it over with. So I'm just going to start pushing everybody's buttons and get everybody mad. We'll have our crisis, then we'll get back to the honeymoon. And that becomes the only tool that they have to deal with the anger that they feel. Okay, next thing I want you to understand is we talk about anger triggers, okay? And I want you to think of two different types of things that will cause the eruption of the volcano. Number one is, the one we think of the most, is the instantaneous thing. Somebody calls you a name that just gets you and you explode. In that nanosecond, you go from 0 to 100, and it is a huge display of lava exploding. So that's one, but there's a second type, and that is this. It's the slowly building pressure, stress that you're not dealing with. You're just stuffing it. So this person annoyed you. You should talk to them because they violated a boundary. You don't feel like talking to them, so you stuff. This person, well, they didn't keep a promise, and that really bothers you. You should try to resolve it, but you just don't. You stuff it. And the pressure builds. And then it takes the slightest little thing. All it can take is your partner saying, how are you today? And you go, why did you ask me that question? And you go crazy. And you go, where did that come from? Well, it's 2 weeks of building pressure. And then it takes one little thing to push it over the top. So that's important to understand, because what happens in recovery is you need to become self-aware that the lava pressure is building. So what are some of the early warning signs? You just find yourself, you're a little more irritable these days than you were last week. That's a good red flag. And part of that irritability is you're just less patient with the kids, less patience with your partner, with your friends. Then you can have difficulty sleeping because your mind is going. You just hang on to the anger and you feed it. And then you get extra anxiety. You want to start isolating, or you just want to make a rash decision to feel better. That's all building pressure. So the better you're able to understand your warning signs, the better you're able to catch yourself, and then you go, okay, I better figure out how to resolve some of these issues that are causing the pressure to build. Because if I don't resolve them, there's going to be an explosion. And I know I will regret it once it happens. Next thing, when you talk about any emotion, use emotional energy. Okay? So picture somewhere inside of you, there's an imaginary gas tank called your emotional gas tank, your emotional energy gas tank. So if you're a bit worried, that takes emotional energy. If you graduate and you're all excited, it's a positive thing, but it uses emotional energy. You have a flashback from a memory and it brings up a loss, that takes emotional energy. Everything takes emotional energy. Here's the part I want you to get. What happens if your gas tank gets to empty and you don't put more gasoline in it? Now you face a situation and you don't have any emotional reserves to handle that situation because your gas tank's on empty. So then what happens when you have no emotional reserves? You go in one of two directions. You become very depressed or you get really angry. And so if you are not replenishing your emotional gas tank on a regular basis in a healthy way, you are probably going to start going into empty. And if you don't learn how to do that, then you are going to hit empty and you'll go into depression, or you will explode in anger and you'll be angry all the time because you have no emotions to handle the rest of life. Now, what some people do is they push even when they get to empty and they burn out. And that can show up in an emotional breakdown. That can show up in you just lose all interest in life. You are so done. You go, what's the point? And so for some people, when they hit that point, the only way they know to try and get their gas tank filled up again is to relapse. You go, I got too many responsibilities, too much pressure, too much stress. I can't handle this. I need a holiday. I'm going to relapse for a while. And then I'll get all my emotional energy gas tank filled up, and then I'll be ready to go again. That is not a healthy way to go through life, getting your emotional gas tank filled up. But that is what many people do. Last thing I want you to think about. We just talked about things that take emotional energy. Now I want you to think about things that feed the lava. Things that cause the underlying anger to stay alive. So another way to say this is, what are the practical solutions for dealing with all this anger? What steps do I need to take to reduce the total amount of lava in my life? How do I begin to get rid of it? So here are the things that complex trauma people need to resolve. And as you resolve these things, the total amount of lava gets lower and lower and lower because you're dealing with this stuff. So there's a bunch of things I'm going to go through very quickly. When you have losses, you're going to grieve. And part of grieving is there's a stage of grief called anger. You're mad about the loss. You don't like life without that loss. It seems wrong or unfair. So anger is a natural part of losing something. So if you don't resolve the loss, you stay angry. And it stays deep down inside of you. Second, if you have resentments that you have not resolved, they keep the anger alive. So part of dealing with that lava is dealing with the resentments. Third, depression and anxiety. Now, if you have a chemical imbalance like I do, and you deal with these things, you may need medication. That's an important part of it. But a lot of anger or a lot of anxiety and depression for people from complex trauma, they need to start resolving the issues from their childhood that have created the depression and the anxiety. And so you have to begin therapy, counseling, working through those areas. 4, guilt and failure. Guilt and failure causes you to beat yourself up. It causes anger at yourself. So deal with your guilty conscience. Get it clean. Resolve the things that are keeping that guilt monster alive. Shame. Shame is, I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I'm lovable. I feel like I'm less than everybody else. That makes you angry at yourself. So a huge, and I would say probably one of the key pieces in getting rid of the lava and dealing with that deep down anger is healing from shame. That keeps that lava alive probably more than anything else. In everyday circumstances, you need to deal with control issues. If you want to control everybody, guess what? You're going to be angry all the time because you can't control everybody. So you have to figure out how to start giving up control if you're going to ever deal with all of that anger. And then we've talked about being narcissistic. You have to develop this thing called humility. And humility isn't walking around saying, I'm nobody, I'm no good. Humility simply says, I'm equal to everybody. I see myself accurately now. I'm not less than or greater than. I'm equal. And I will treat people as equals. Their needs and my needs are equally important. And then unrealistic expectations. If you expect everybody in your recovery who's from your family to trust you automatically, guess what? You're going to be angry with your family all the time because they're not going to trust you immediately. If you expect everybody that hears what you're going through to be supportive and be there for you whenever you call, you're going to be mad at a whole bunch of people because those are unrealistic expectations. So a lot of anger comes from unrealistic expectations. Apply that to yourself. If you're a perfectionist, you're going to be angry at yourself all the time because you can't do everything perfectly. And then unresolved stress leads to feeling overwhelmed. And when you feel overwhelmed, you're either mad at yourself, mad at God for your life, mad at everybody in your world who's not helping you. That is overwhelmed, and that is anger. You have to begin resolving stress not procrastinating responsibilities. And then exhaustion. What I want you to see is this. Dealing with all that underlying anger, that lava, we got to deal with our emotions. We got to deal with our relationships. We got to deal with our past. And we got to deal with our physical health. You realize if you're totally exhausted, you have no energy left in your emotional tank or your physical tank, you're going to be angry. So you got to begin taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, if you want to deal with the anger. And the final one, if you remain a victim, you will always be angry. So complex trauma, you were a victim. You were abused. You were neglected. You were abandoned. That victimhood was never validated by the important people in your life. It was minimized. You were told to get over it. You were told to quit being such a suck. Now you need that validated. But you now have to move out of victim status. And what a victim is poor me, I can't do anything. Getting out of that is saying, I'm going to grow up. I'm going to do what needs to be done to change. I can't go back and redo the past years, but I can change how I respond today so I start doing healthy things. And then you grow. But if you stay as a victim, guess what victims begin to feel? They feel entitled to have everybody help them and let them stay a little kid. An irresponsible, immature kid. And they're mad at everybody who doesn't do it for them. So those are key things that you have to begin to resolve if you're going to deal with that underlying anger.